Good afternoon, everyone, and apologies for keeping you waiting. Obviously, some minor technical problems. I'd like to welcome you to the elephant in the room is a cow. So I'm Andy Stevens from the Carbon Trust. I've spent the last 10 years of my life measuring carbon emissions from various products and animals and companies and helping them reduce them. I'm delighted to introduce this session today and chair it, and we're going to talk about emissions from agriculture and how we can reduce those, but more importantly, is this a way of engaging both with individuals, consumers, and with companies, and what are the opportunities for companies to be involved across sectors? So I'd like to, first of all, welcome Chris Staubler, who's the Group CEO from Zaluvida. And Zaluvida is a life science company which is looking at some of the biggest health challenges in the world, such as obesity, antibiotic resistance, and livestock emissions. And they've done a lot of research on livestock emissions, and Chris is now going to present one of their new and very exciting products to help reduce emissions in livestock. Chris.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. As you probably know, 15% of the global greenhouse gas emissions are from livestock, but it was not a focus of the last 21 climate conferences, and that's why we talk about the elephant in the room. Now we did a survey with thousands of consumers in Europe, and 2/3 of the consumers know that livestock emissions are a big issue. In fact, most of them believe that livestock emissions are a far more significant contributor than the 15%. We've also asked, why do you think no one has actually done anything about livestock emission? And the obvious answer was politics, lobbying, but also, quality and safety of food. These were the two reasons coming back. Now within that, the cow is by far the biggest issue, because each individual cow per year emits about 2.5 tons of CO2 equivalents. Nearly all of it, at least 80 to 90%, is through burping through the mouth. So a less well-known fact is that an average cow per year produces more CO2 equivalent than a car. And this is also true in the absolute, because there's 1.5 billion cars, there's 1.5 billion cows, and both are actually trending towards the 2.5 billion mark. Now, I don't know whether this video will play, but if not, I'll do the narrative. We ask consumers, are you aware that the cow is a contributor to greenhouse gas emissions? And the overwhelming majority says absolutely not, and had a lot of shocking comments. So let's have a look at what's really going on in the cow. So the elephant in the room, when talking climate change, is really the cow. And nobody wants to talk about it. When a cow gets born, it's pretty much perfect, because it only has good bacteria in the stomach. But very quickly, the bad bacteria also start to develop in the cow's stomach, same as in the human. Now, we have pre- and probiotics if we need them, but a cow doesn't. And it's more complicated because a cow has 4 stomachs, not just one like us. So it takes a long time to digest the food, and the bad bacteria steal some of the food, roughly 6%, and turn it into methane, into greenhouse gas. Now, even Skippy cannot help, because the kangaroos don't have the same problem as cows, and early research attempts actually went towards taking the bacteria from a kangaroo and implanting it into cows, but that didn't go very far. So what to do? Now, the first idea is not always the best, but this was attempted in many countries. It's like a tank that collects the gas that comes out the back end of the cow to collect the methane, but as we've just learned, 80% comes out the other way. There are no devices that capture it from both ends, but if you see a cow wearing it, it's not a lovely sight. Now, it really isn't that simple, because cows are actually not used to a lot of natural substances. So whatever you develop, a cow needs to eat it, and a cow needs to be able to digest it. For example, they don't like bitter things, or they can't digest fats. Yeah, there are up to 4 billion of bacteria into the cow's stomach system, so it takes quite some science to modulate that. It needs to be fit for the feed and the food chain, also in terms of safety and in terms of sustainability. It needs to be scalable, because a lot of the things that you now read in the news, that somebody says from another continent, I found something that can do a big impact on cow emissions, it's not scalable in an environmentally friendly way to feed the world's cows. And lastly, it should be affordable. So we have spent nearly 10 years of our lives actually researching and developing a solution, a natural feed supplement for cows. So we've worked with pretty much all the leading research institutes in Europe, and we've done almost any test you can imagine and some that you cannot imagine, both in cow models, cows in gas boxes, cows in tents, real cows on a farm. We've done it, and we've done it most of the time 3 or 4 or 5 times. And one very important thing is it's rather easy to make an impact on a cow on a day, but to make it sustainable is all the more complex. So a lot of our research has been longitudinal to show over 6, 9, 12 months, because you don't want to basically feed the cow every day. It becomes too expensive. So I'll show you Mootral without sound. So Mootral is very important, is a natural growth promoter. It actually selectively acts on the bad bacteria that are in the cow's stomachs, and then the good bacteria can use more of the food, and they can become more prominent. So the cow gets more food, and hence a better yield and a better health. It is a combination of extracts from garlic and extracts from citrus as a byproduct from the food industry, so it's very sustainable. And if you do the calculation, Mootral into 1 cow reduces greenhouse gas by at least 30% for the cow. And if we were to feed this to all the cows that we can realistically get, because some of them live far away, then that would be the equivalent of 200 million cars off the road, just to show the magnitude of the impact. So we basically tick the 5 boxes, because cows are not only happy to eat our stuff, they actually eat more of the food if they get some of our stuff into the feed. They can digest it very well. It only works on the bad bacteria, so it dials down the metagenesis, but the cow has more food, grows quicker and better. It is really fit for the feed chain, because it just goes into the feed bags that the farmer receives at the farm. We need 10 grams a day of our stuff, and that's basically into a 10-kilo bag, and that's all. It's very much scalable, because garlic and citrus extracts as a byproduct are abundant, and it's very much affordable. Now, whenever I say garlic and citrus extracts, it sounds like something you could possibly make in your kitchen, but that isn't the case. And that's why it took us, nearly a decade. We are one of the companies who have spent close to 20 years researching garlic and extracting the actives and producing the actives from garlic, and it's a fiendishly complex species. And some of the actives actually go towards curing rare diseases as prescription drugs. So this is really state-of-the-art biotech. Now, having a product is one thing, but in our conviction, we need also a different approach. We need fresh thinking to make progress on livestock. And there's really three aspects to that. We heard some of that this morning. We think we need to activate a market mechanism. We need to connect with the people, with the consumers. And we also need to bring in constituents of other industries, other sectors, not just stay focused on livestock on a one-to-one equation. The way I see the picture of today is you have governments and you have consumers or the people, and you have the livestock industry all pulling in different directions. Basically, governments, no surprise, talk taxes, meat taxes, all types of taxes, both towards consumers. You've seen that in the last couple of days. It's been discussed in UK, it's been discussed in Denmark, etc. But also is approaching the livestock industry with regulation. And the livestock industry does what it normally does. It reacts with lobbying. As you probably know, in the US, 41 sectors report progress on greenhouse gas, and the only one that doesn't is the livestock industry. But you have to be fair, there is also economic pressure there. It's a very, very difficult business with very low prices. Now the people, when we did our survey, in every country climate change is #2 concern, ahead of war and other things. And it's up from 4 or 3 in most cases. And the people are really willing to do something if it's a direct link to something that they understand. And frankly, you know, like it or not, a lot of people still like and depend on meat and milk. So in our conviction, if we find a market mechanism and if we bring in other industries, automotive, airlines, retail, but also the food industry, then we can actually dissolve that impasse and we create a proper win-win, because you have happier and healthier cows. You probably need less of them in the future, at least not the 2.5 billion. You have a more prosperous industry because they get better yields and healthier animals. People are obviously embracing making a change on the greenhouse gas, and we end up with a better planet. Now we've developed some ideas that we showed to consumers on how to actually make that work. The most obvious one was climate-friendly beef. So we just proposed them, here's beef from, you know, climate-friendly cows. And unsurprisingly, more than half, you know, says, yeah, I'd pay more for that. And 60% say, I pay the same as for organic or for fair trade. But we didn't stop there, because we thought if we want to make a big impact, we need to change cows to become tradable currencies. That sounds very odd at first, but think about it. One cow, if it is on our product, it's 1 ton less greenhouse gas. So if we find a way that people actually invest into cows, and that won't all be the farmer, for sure not, that will be partly industry, partly consumers, partly governments, then we probably have a very quick contribution to positive impact. So again, nearly 2/3 of people said, I love that. You know, that's because it's direct. It's not like government taxes me something and will spend it on something else. It is something I can relate to. And the first and the most obvious approach was, we said, you know, you buy a new Volkswagen Golf, or you buy a new Renault, or you buy whatever you want, and we make that car CO2 emission free, because you can sponsor 3 cow credits. And then we were gauging how much the consumers are willing to pay themselves and how much manufacturers would actually gain if they offer this instead of just a plain discount, because most cars are now shifted with, you know, significant discounts or with free extras. So we actually read the whole response. Would you rather have another driver assistance systems, or would you prefer 3 cow carriages? Yeah. And again, half the people, it's always glass half full, but half is, you know, a revolution, say, yes, I'm willing to pay more. And a third is saying, I'm happy to pay more than 500 euro, which, you know, is a lot more than 3 cows, frankly. So our Mootral is actually, if it's at a decent scale, a gigaton CO2 solution. And we heard this morning, everybody knows there is, you know, 12 to 14 gigaton gap, and this would be the first one right off the bat, and it's something that's available now. And it would be 2.5% of today's emissions. Just gone. As I said, to make this happen, it's not just a product, but it's really also market mechanism outside of the traditional thinking, as well as cross-industry collaboration. But if we get all that right, then we can open an amazing new frontier against climate change, and we call it the movement. So with that,
Thank you very much, Chris. So what we wanted to do now is I'll introduce the other 2 members of the panel and have a discussion about what Chris has presented. So this is obviously a really serious issue. As Chris has pointed out, livestock emissions are 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, while in the other room and this morning we've been talking about how to reduce the emissions from energy by renewable energy. The other major area is transport. The third biggest challenge is agriculture, and there's not enough work being done to talk about it. Milk, in particular, and cows is very significant. So there are 5 countries in the world which have more cows than people. One of those countries, Brazil, the emissions from cows is estimated to be half of the total emissions of that country. So this is, I mean, this is a significant problem, and if we can tackle it even partially, then that's going to make a major difference. So what I wanted to do, to introduce the panel and ask them for their feedback. So Andreas Klugerscheidt is the responsible for corporate and government affairs and sustainability at BMW. And BMW has got a very significant commitment to sustainability and has got a publicly stated goal to reduce the emissions of the new fleets that it produces by 50% by 2020. And also introduce Michael Graz, who's the managing director of Neem Biotech, who have done the research and development responsible for Mootral, and can also answer any awkward questions you have around the science of this if you want to. We also have a seat at the end for Alison Cairns from Unilever, but she's obviously been held up. She was due to fly in this morning, so if she does arrive, then we'll introduce her when she arrives. So, Andreas, what we wanted to sort of focus on is how this could be implemented. So to be effective, this needs to operate at scale. So how do you think this idea of using cow credits might work with consumers in terms of encouraging the take-up of this technology?
Thank you, and thank you for being able to speak here on that panel today. First of all, I think I want to do justice to the cow, okay? Because as it seems in your presentation, the cow is the problem. In our case with BMW, I just want to give you one example that the cow can be part of the solution as well. If the speaker system would have worked, you would have seen a film now about 30,000 cows that we actually employ to produce electricity for our plant in South Africa. We have, since the late 60s, actually early 70s, we are producing cars in South Africa. It's a plant of, I don't know, 60 to 70,000 units. And as you know, the South African energy mix is pretty much defined by coal, right? So we started, and that is not we as BMW, but a company called Bio2Watt was partnering with us to actually bring 30,000 cows into energy production. So this is an example that shows that BMW is not in particular fond of cows. That's more or less a coincidence, but rather very much fond of alternative energy solutions in order to bring down the carbon footprint, not only of our products, and you were mentioning our ambitious targets, but also the CO2 emissions in our value chain. That is very important and makes clearly a difference. Now, your question was, what about these cow credits, right? And how can we link that to our consumers and our consumer behavior? We have brought with the BMW i Series full electric vehicles and plug-in electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles into the market. And there it was for us very, very important not to sell only a vehicle, a product that has no tailpipe, in the case of the BMW i3, full electric car, but also that is from a value chain very clean and green. I was referring to the cows for the South African plant. We have water power, wind power in the production value chain of the BMW i3 full electric vehicle. And so, yes, I think we see a mind shift in consumer behavior that clearly goes into sustainability. One has to be a little bit cautious, though, when it comes to market segments, right? So in different market segments, that looks not necessarily the same. In the so-called premium market segment where BMW is operating, you will probably find that to a larger degree than compared to the mass volume market, and then obviously also geographical and regional differences play certainly a role, right? So would a cow credit work with BMW customers? Probably yes. You know, one could try it. One has to also bear in mind, though, that people have a certain list of preferences, and while carbon neutrality is certainly a topic, costs are as well, even in the premium segment, and more so in the mass volume segment. So I think, linking products that are green and clean and sustainable to something like a super value chain, so to say, might make sense, but it needs to be certainly explored to a large degree, and it really depends. So that is the usual answer to tricky questions. It depends. So this is the case here as well. But it's, I have to actually admit that I think if it works, I'm not a bioscientist, nor am I good in chemistry overall or biology. But if that works, it sounds like a good idea, actually. So my kudos to you guys and your 20 years of research. Looks good.
So thank you, Andreas. And this point might be a good point to lead in for Michael to explain a little bit more, if you likes, about how that works in terms of the science and the research that's been done for the last 10 to 20 years.
I suppose my first question has to be how many chemists are in the room before I start with very detailed science. Chris did steal some of my thunder, but we have been working on this concept for the past 10 years quite extensively. Chris had a list up of our partners that we've been working with. We're a small biotech firm. We don't have a single cow in our laboratory. We use the world's leading organizations to do this work with us, and they wouldn't be working with us if they didn't believe that we had a concept that would work. Our early work, which was published probably 6 to 7 years ago, had some challenges, which Chris alluded to in terms of the sustainability of the result, as well as the transience of what you can get. The one problem that you have, and I know that previously this week there were some presentations on other potential solutions, is the product effectively washes out of the cow. So you constantly have to refeed the animal in order to be able to get the result that you want. When Chris and I joined the organization, we've been spending the last really 3 years looking at reformulating the product to give a stable result. And yeah, this is not, as Chris pointed out, kitchen chemistry. The sulfur chemistry in garlic is probably the most complex plant chemistry that exists in terms of trying to understand it and stabilize it. And we as an organization, as one of our other projects, actually have what is considered a tertiary metabolite of garlic, which has just been given orphan drug designation by the FDA. And orphan drug designation means that they recognize it as a potential treatment for a rare disease. In our case, this is for lung infections in cystic fibrosis patients. So the work that we're doing isn't oversimplified, and it is really cutting edge biotech. What we're working on is to change the ecology inside the cow's rumen, and to do it in such a way that we don't negatively affect the overall ecology, but just affect one portion of it and allow the other organisms that are present to redevelop in a new relationship that allows the cow to extract a lot more energy from what it eats. And we've shown that quite extensively, that with our products, when you feed them to cattle, they eat more, and the amount of methane they then produce per kilogram of feed that they've eaten is reduced significantly. And at the same time, we're seeing in our animal models, and this doesn't just hold true to cows. Neem Biotech is based in Wales. Wales is probably more sheep than people. It holds just as true for sheep, where you're seeing up to a 20% increase in the feed conversion efficiency. And that is very significant if that can be turned into a long-term economic benefit for the farmer. I'd much rather than sit here and talk sulfur chemistry, invite anybody that wants to rather come and have a chat with me afterwards, and I'll talk you through our science, and we can set up a dialogue afterwards.
Thank you, Michael. I think, Chris, did you want to, have you thought about what sort of barriers there would be to the uptake of this idea about cow credits, and whether they be regulatory or consumer? Your consumer research posts quite a positive picture.
I first would like to respond to something that Andreas rightly mentioned, which is this is not about demonizing cows, because, you know, people love cows, and cows are, have been with us since the dawn of mankind, so that it's not about that. But don't forget that the cow that man have created is not the cow that once was there before we started, messing with it. So a modern cow is like a dairy cow is like Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's not. So I think the way I like to see it is we're correcting something that we as mankind have done to a lovely animal. And whilst there are a lot of, reasons to say we should eat less meat, we should be more responsible, because it's not just the methane, we all know that. The way I would approach it is, it's a low-hanging fruit to do something good in the here and now, and it's probably from an economic cost far less than what some of the industries are spending on changing their game plan, and some of those are on more extended timelines. I mean, that's kind of from an overall point. I think, when I first thought of this idea of cow credits with the team, it sounded very strange, but like I said, a cow has more greenhouse gas than a car on average, and I'm talking, today, forget tomorrow when all the car makers have made big progress, then the equivalent will change. So tackling that, I think there should be economic interest, because if you can fix 1 gigaton, with a cost that probably is very, very affordable. I mean, today, you know, if he makes a 10-gram sachet in the lab by hand, and if I have to feed that to a cow every day, which I don't, we would be talking 300 euro, okay? Now that sounds like a lot, but actually, if a car maker has to put a new filter or whatever, we're talking a lot more. Now once we're at scale, I think in a worst case scenario, we're talking 50 euro per year, which is absolutely nothing. I mean, the average American takes supplements per day that are far more than €1, you know. So I think from a cost to society, if we're purposeful about making a difference, then this is, for me, a bargain. But what's really coming out of all the research, and we've also done a lot of, you know, think tanks and focus groups and whatever you want, is the majority of people, they don't want to just be educated that things are bad, you know, don't eat meat and don't do this and don't do that, and taxed without them knowing where that actually is going. I mean, I offset everything I can, and most people do, you know, we take a plane, we offset it, but do we really know what's going with that? We don't. And the beauty of this is everybody loves cows, or most people do, you know, as an animal. It actually, we did the research, it ranks just above the kangaroo, believe it or not. And, you know, there's something lovely about the scalability of it. And it's like when, you know, I remember when I was young, and that's a long time ago, when economic aid was always very anonymous. You know, you send off money somewhere and you don't know. But then when we were able to adopt children and villages and whatever it is, it's a whole different emotion. And I think that's what's the opportunity here, is you can pay for, you know, 1, 2, 3 or as many cows. You make a huge difference today. I don't see the downside with that. But of course, you know, a lot of work has to go into it, health economics, all that. I wouldn't immediately discard it. I mean, that would be my answer.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Andreas, specifically from BMW's perspective, two questions, I guess. One is how BMW might engage sort of across sectors in this. You've already mentioned the example where you in the project you've got in South Africa, which already demonstrates you're doing that, but other examples maybe. But also, specifically in terms of the cow credits, whether BMW would consider, when you sell a new car, obviously not an electric one, would you sponsor cow credits to the consumers with that?
So let's take your first question first. One thing is important that doesn't relate so much to the cow, and it gives me the opportunity to leave the cow for a second, actually. Specifically, when you think about decarbonizing mobility, you rely on partners. Think about electric vehicles, right? Electric vehicles are totally different in terms of the business case for car manufacturers. In, let's say, the old days, or let's take today still, because obviously the majority of our cars are still conventional internal combustion engine cars. You produce a car, you get it out to the dealer, he sells it, and you have a little bit of, you know, after sales and service stuff going on. With an electric vehicle, you strongly rely on a network of others who actually also contribute. Today, the price of an electric vehicle is actually coming down, but it's still something that is considered to be a hurdle. So you rely on governments for incentives to support this societal benefit of decarbonizing mobility. Then an electric vehicle needs charging, so you rely on an infrastructure that obviously needs to be delivered by others, because we are not building filling stations, right? So we are not going to build infrastructure, even though we set some you know, impulses there, but overall this is something that needs to be done with partners. Then you want to have, and we are getting closer to the cow here, you want to have CO2 neutral electricity in the car. So you better speak with one of the utilities, or with many utilities apparently, to discuss with them how you can actually generate this electricity in a CO2 neutral way. And actually our BMW i3 full electric vehicle customers, and also our plug-in hybrid customers, they can get CO2 neutral energy contracts actually through us and from us together with our partners. So the bottom line here is, the message here is, we rely on a totally different kind of partnership landscape. Now you will not see me today signing any contract to the cow credit, right? That is not going to be the deal. But I think ideas like that, you know, innovative ideas that actually go down the route that Chris was actually mentioning, of a more emotional approach, of something people can relate to, is certainly more successful than just, and again you mentioned that, Chris, just telling them, don't do this, don't do that, and please don't do that, right? Because, you know, in a free world, and it happens to be that many markets are open to competition and open to free choice, in a free world, people will not go to something that depresses them, but that makes them happy. It's plain, but still true. So the storyline, the narrative that you bring into the game, into the market with your product, really makes the difference. And so good ideas are always good, and if it's a good cause, and as it is, seems to be in this case, then certainly that has a good future.
Thank you very much. On that point, I mean, are there comments or questions from the audience on, one, how they see this working and how positive it might be? Yeah, we've got one question down the middle.
Okay, thanks a lot. This sounds really interesting. You announced your solution 7 years ago. So just for basic information, how many cows you have fed already with your ingredients, and what is about the quality of milk and meat and the taste of milk and meat with your ingredients?
Okay, I mean, there are three questions there. I think the first question was, it's well known that, you know, we've done 10 years of work on this, and the latest sort of published reports date from about 3 years ago. And the first question was, what happened in those kind of 3 years, or why did nothing happen? And it's very simple. The most difficult challenge was to get this into the animal at the absolute minimum dose, and to do it in a way that you can guarantee that the result is not only there every day, but it's also repeatable, you know. Historically, some of the garlic formulations, and there's, you know, tons of publications on that, they were either crude extracts from garlic or even liquid, and that had issues with stability, that had issues with the amount that the animal needed to eat, and then it becomes a tipping point. If you put very little into the animal's food, it actually eats more and likes it. And there is no tainting of milk or meat. If, as you were researching, you know, 8-10 years ago, you put a lot of garlic oil into the water of the cow, she's not that happy. So today, imagine you have, I think, about 2.5 grams of an extremely high quality garlic extract into 10 kilogram food bag that goes to the cow. So even the older, you know, research showed no impact on milk or meat, but for sure now that we're at this level, which took us frankly 3 years to get to, there isn't a problem. The second barrier that frankly took us quite a while was our predecessors in the company. They were always thinking about the farmer or the industry should pay for it. And even on my first day, I said that's not going to happen because, you know, everybody knows where the milk price is today. It's unrealistic to assume any immediate investment from that industry. And secondly, that the historical carbon credits, I think they have no link to the true economic cost of reaching climate change goals. You know, I follow very closely what all the industries are doing in terms of investments, either in new generations of products or into offsetting their carbon footprint. And I always divide that mentally through how many cows I could feed tomorrow, and then if you do the calculation, you know, it would be a much better investment. But that thinking wasn't there historically. It was thinking the industry has to pay. Well, they won't, at least not for now, because they're not even reporting in most, you know, cases what their impact is. And I have some sympathy for that, because that's what I meant with this one-to-one. You know, I go after every sector in isolation, and I go after consumers with taxes and often a negative message. So I think these two were the big impediments that kept us busy for the last 3 years, whilst the product from a, you know, principle point of view was already there. That's kind of, does that answer your question?
Hello, I have a question for the chemist, but we won't get into chemistry. I'm going to come and pin you on that later. The real issue is do you have acknowledgement from someone like the FDA that you don't need to go through an approval process for the feed additive because of the chemical process that you've been doing? And if you have spoken to the FDA, where are they at in the approval process?
How best to, well, I'm just trying to think how best to answer this. No, we haven't spoken to the FDA. Being European, we've spoken to EFSA, obviously, because they control feed additives in Europe. And based on our processes, there is, based on their opinion, no difference to products that have actually been previously registered in terms of the components that we're using.
I mean, in Europe and in the US, as you know, there are lists of naturally occurring substances that you can put into a cow's feed. And our substances are on those lists. I mean, that's the first, okay? Now, if you produce it naturally rather than synthetically, then you do not need to go for lengthy approval because that's already been done. So we have a similar product that replaces antibiotics, you know, not just in cows, but any other species. And both in the US and in Europe, it is going into animals because the regulator has long time ago acknowledged that a cow, when it goes around, it eats just about anything that occurs naturally in nature. So we don't have that barrier. Of course, we will also talk to the FDA, you know, but I don't expect any hurdle whatsoever because we are on those lists of naturally occurring substances, and there is nothing chemical. We could do it synthetically and it will probably be cheaper, but we don't, because then a lot of concerns, you know, may pop up that we don't have. The alternatives that I've followed now the last 20 years of history, there is stories from seaweed, from berries, from all types of things, but many of them are not even naturally occurring in, you know, and are not on the list, but this is. So I really don't expect an obstacle. In Europe, for sure not, because we've done, you know, our homework, and the US according to our regulatory consultants, the US is actually more friendly than Europe typically in those areas.
Thank you. I think we've got time for probably a couple more questions, and I've got 3 hands up. So the gentleman at the back there on my left, right at the further back. Further back? Right there. Yep, thank you. And then we'll take
I have a question about the practical use of it. I mean, in countries like Brazil and the US, cows are fed up in feedlots. So how would you regulate the individual amount given to the cow?
Okay. Could we take another question here, and then we could answer them together? So the gentleman here, and then we'll take this last question from.
Yes, I wanted to bring up the question of what you said about the cows eating anything which comes in their way. I think there are countries where the feed of the cow can be controlled totally because it is industrialized. There are other countries like India where cows goes about wherever they want and they eat whatever they want. So there would be a problem if we wanted to do that in India. But it would be interesting because of the number of cows that there are in India. Now I have a suggestion that you could maybe manipulate this through the TVA, added value tax, which could be different on cows which are fed without Mootral and cows which are fed with Mootral added. Because with Mootral added, they are producing less CO2. So you can bring down the TVA normally applied to products which are made from that cow. You know, this is the question of modulated TVA depending upon the environmental impact. There is a big campaign in France on this. There are people who are working on this. So this is something which we could explore in France. I'm based in France. But of course, for this type of thing, you have to go through the employers' organizations. Absolutely essential. The other aspect, I want to bring this up because we know that the regular diet of people who live in the West and who are aping the West in the emerging countries contains a lot of meat. This is negative for the environment. It's also negative for their own health, since meat has now been, especially red meat, has been classified as being producing cancer, you know. So there is maybe this factor also to take into account. And last point, the garlic that you are using is not OGM. It is not genetically modified. It doesn't exist?
No, it's not. It's not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you. So we've got two questions, but quite a lot of in there. But one of the common themes there was how do you control the feed to cows, and examples from both Brazil and India, and then also whether a different sort of incentive through taxing might help with that. I don't know.
Well, I'm not going to try and answer the tax question. I admit I'm a scientist. Our product withstands extrusion, and so actually the way we feed it to cattle in Europe at the moment in terms of the trials that we've been doing is actually in extruded pellets as part of the diet that they're fed. We've also calculated the range that, I mean, the amount that the animal has to ingest as a range in order to be able to get the effect. We know that cattle actually have a hierarchy within a herd, and certain cattle will always eat first and eat more than others, and we've tried to, in our work, account for that to make sure that even the poor animal that gets to eat last still gets sufficient of it in a repeat dose. We're not trying to solve the problem with the first dose that they get, but over a certain period, after which we then do see the longitudinal changes that we would hope. In terms of the question where you're talking about animals that are free range effectively, we're currently working on whether or not we can actually put this technology into a bolus, so that could be given to the cow and then be released over a certain period of time. But that currently still poses some technical challenges that we're busy trying to get around.
Thank you. Very exciting developments, and I'm sure the entire vegan community is, very pleased. But my question is to the overall methane emissions from cattle, but it really has to be viewed in terms of cattle production. So have you calculated the amount of, for instance, rainforest that gets cleared to grow the food, to feed the cows, et cetera, and because it's a big number globally, there's no doubt about it, but I'm wondering what percentage of the methane that the cows burp and release that this technology addresses, what is that relative to the overall production of methane resulting from the animal raising of the cattle industry worldwide. Counting, of course, the land cleared, the transport, the feedlots, et cetera, et cetera.
In what I had in my presentation was the 4% of, by now probably 5 with the amount of cows we have, of CO2 equivalent that lives in the 15% that is accounting towards attributed to the livestock sector. If I reduce that by a third, which is the conservative assumption, and if I do that to half the world's cows, because we were quite conservative, accounting for challenges like India, etc., then that would be my 1.2 gigatons, CO2 equivalent, as in methane. I'm totally cognizant that there are many other devastating, negative impacts associated with livestock. Now today, I can't, as a company, resolve those. But I thought the spirit in which we, embarked on this is, if we can do something now and something on a scale that is, quite gigantic, so to say, then it can't hurt. It's not. I mean, the projection of cows is, as I said, from 1.5 to 2.5. That is a problem. If we can contribute that this does not happen because the animals have a better yield, and if in addition, of course, and rightly so, there is campaigns about eat less meat and all that, which, it's not, for me, it's always an and. It's not an against, one or the other. You heard maybe in the introduction, one of our company's foundational, missions was obesity. Every government, the United Nations, every doctor says every day to every person, you should eat better and you should move about more, and all of us are getting fatter, yeah? So also there, I mean, there has to be a combination of, low-hanging fruit that work in the here and now, that builds some bridges and some help. I think that's, would be my answer to this question.
Well, thank you very much. I'll just sort of quickly sum up in terms of what we've heard, because I think we've run out of time. So very simply, the emissions from livestock is a significant problem. Here is a potential solution to help. It's scalable, it's affordable, and the cow is not just the problem, but also part of the solution. We've seen a mind shift in consumer attitudes related to climate change, which can help. The work that's been done is backed up by very detailed research and a lot of trials. But to make it work, we need new partnerships. We need partnerships between different industries and with consumers and with government. And we need more innovative ideas, of which this is one. So I'd like to thank very much the panel for their contributions and the audience for listening. Thank you.